In the business of cartoons, there's two basic legal forms a lot of people ask me about, and that's the submission release form and the non-disclosure agreement. These can be sometimes confusing and intimidating. They can even feel offensive. So I thought I'd make a video to try to explain these forms to you in the most plain, simple English I can. Hey there, welcome back to Surviving Animation, your guide to making it in the business of cartoons. My name is Eric Calderon. Today's discussion is actually about legal forms, so I need to say up front that I'm not actually a lawyer, but I've been in the business for about 25 years, and some of these most simple forms I've run into over and over again, and I think it's kind of my job, and if you're in the business of cartoons, your job, to understand the basic context of what these forms mean, when they are relevant to you, and when they shouldn't matter to you at all. So I hope today's video gives you some understanding of that, gives you just a tiny sense of mastery, and ultimately give you a more informed way to speak to your professional lawyer about your situation and decide if it's right for you. So today's discussion is going to be about the submission release form and the non-disclosure agreements. The reason I chose these two is that they come up so often. They come up in almost every company or situation I've met that I thought I would give back to people just getting into the business, or someone who's even in the business for a long time but maybe hasn't done development, kind of just an understanding of what these are from a plain English point of view, and I really hope it helps. So okay, let's dig right in and start with the submission release form. If I were to describe this in the most simple way I could, I say, hey, pro to pro, will you check this out for me? Now, the reason I say it like that is that's really what you're doing. You are submitting a form professionally that someone else can look at and say, okay, now I've seen this form and you've signed it, I've signed it, so I can now professionally look at your work. So let's break down some points of what the submission release form means. Again, these are just plain English terms. I hope they demystify a little bit of what happens in these forms. So first of all, a submission release form is really there to protect the receiver from being sued. That's almost the most important function of these release forms. Now, I used to work in a big company. I worked in a couple of big companies that got pitched a lot. And what happens is when there's an influx of hundreds, maybe even thousands of ideas, invariably a lot of these ideas will feel very similar to each other. So it's always going to be easy for person A to say, hey, I pitched something to you that is a lot like thing B that you just put out in the network. Now, it might be conspiratorial for you to think, oh my God, they copied my idea and they stole it from me. I've just got to tell you from my experience in the business, it just so rarely, if ever, happens. And actually, the ideas that actually come and get made as compared by the people who are making a big deal about it, it's really tends to be pretty weighed on the just never happened side. So actually, if you think you have an idea that you see on TV or see on film, I hate to sound kind of blunt, but probably a bunch of other people may have had that idea. That's kind of like the base assumption a lot of these companies have. So we have to protect ourselves from those kind of situations occurring. So the next thing that a submission release form is actually the receiving party, the person who got the form, is actually putting in writing in that form that, okay, we are receiving this, but we're not making you any promises up front. We're just going to review it and look at it. So it's almost like a stamp to say, we got it, we're looking at it. We may or may not talk to you about it, but this is the day we've got it. This is the day you've sent it. And, that's kind of the stamp on it. All right, the third thing that a submission release form actually does is actually admit that your submission is not confidential. So let's say you submit something to me, your submission release form by its nature says, I can talk to other people about it, or you can talk to other people about it. It's not something that is, confidential to both parties, and I don't have to have any rights to you to say, hey, I promise not to show this to anyone, or because you sent it to me, that means that I'm the one who's supposed to look at it. It's also the opposite. It's kind of like, I'm submitting this to you, and I'm submitting to other people, and I know that you've got to talk to people about this. So the last thing a submission release form does is actually kind of promise that what you're putting out to the person you're sending it to is original. So if it's something that you've created by yourself, that means you're not copying someone else, you're not plagiarizing some other work. It's completely owned by you. Or if you have a few partners on that, or one partner, the submission release form is saying that everything that's been created has been every party that is signed are mentioned on the submission release form. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So the big question is, should you sign a submission release form? That's kind of what it gets down to when people ask me the question about this. In general, I say if you're an industry novice, you probably have to. So if you're coming from the outside of the business and you are pitching to a major company for the first time, you're considered a very high risk. So generally, I would say maybe the first year, then maybe first 2 years, maybe even 3, or in the case of a company you've never met before or doesn't know you and your work is not known out there, basically you're going to have to sign a submission release form to pitch to them something that is original from you. Now, if you have an existing property, and by that I mean if you have a comic book that's out there or a toy that's out there or something that's been published or out there in the marketplace that people have already bought, then you don't have to. There's no reason to do it because it is out there in the marketplace and it's no secret, so you don't have to sign a submission release form. You can just send them the actual work. In general, if you're an experienced pro or your relationship with the person on the other side is advanced, usually those parties will kind of not require you to sign a submission and release form. I think as you gain stature in the industry, as you gain reputation, the submission release forms you tend to sign just become less and less and less until you get to a point where basically you never have to sign one if you're at the highest level of performance in the animation world. Okay, and lastly, if you have an agent or an agency that represents your original work, and they submit it for you, and that's kind of more of the formal way to do it, at least in Hollywood. You don't have to worry about a submission release form at all. Now, I can't say that I know why that's the case, but it's just the way it is, that if something is submitted through an agency, you don't have to worry about that. So, okay, that is a submission release form. So let's move on to the next one, which is called the non-disclosure agreement. So the most basic way that I can explain the non-disclosure agreement is, can we chat openly? Sure, if you promise not to tell. Now, I know that sounds, like a little playground-ish, but in a way, some of these forms can be understood with those simple analogies, so I hope that helps out a little bit. Let's break down a little bit more what a non-disclosure agreement means. So I like to also say that it's a legal pinky promise not to tell anyone else. So once you sign this, you can kind of think to yourself, okay, I'm meeting this company. I promise that whatever they say to me and whatever I say back to them, we have kind of sworn secrecy that it won't leave this room. In non-disclosure agreements, you actually can legally eventually or sometimes talk to outside parties about what you've discussed in the environment of the non-disclosure agreement, but both parties have to agree. So it's a secret until you both say it's okay not to be a secret, if that makes sense. Non-disclosure agreements also come in 2 flavors. There's a one-way and a mutual. So it's kind of self-explanatory, but a one-way non-disclosure agreement would mean, I'm having you come into my company, and anything I say to you, you have to promise not to say to anyone. But I'm not saying that I can't say what you say. A mutual is going to be obviously 2 parties. So if there are 2 conversations that need to happen, that need to be private, that would be a mutual disclosure form. So, all right, let's get to the main question at hand. Should you sign a non-disclosure agreement? So the basic thing about this is that actually many companies make you sign when you enter their building. So if you've ever been to a big company or you've been to a place where they ask you to sign on their way in, the form they're probably giving you is a non-disclosure agreement. So if, let's say, I went to a video game company, or I went to a movie studio, or I went to a comic book publisher or an animation company, when I go in there, of course, there's going to be a lot of things around that aren't out yet in the marketplace. They're still being made. So just by entering the building and signing your name, you're saying that you promise not to reveal that information to the outside world. Now, usually, especially if you're new, or if it's a very tense, very secretive situation, whoever you're meeting will kind of remind you up front, hey, listen, a lot of confidential stuff here, so nothing goes on Twitter, nothing goes on Instagram, there's nothing goes on social media, and you're kind of reminded that you signed a form that means you'll get in pretty big trouble if you decide to, post a Avengers movie spoiler or something like that. So that's the first fact about NDAs. The other thing is, if you're going to have a discussion with a party that involves like software or patents or some kind of industry secrets, then I would say yes. That's a good time to even offer yourself up to the client before you go. Will you sign this non-disclosure, or will you sign a mutual non-disclosure? Because I'm planning this big release of something that the industry can't know about or my competitors can't know about until it comes out. So in those situations, and you'll have to decide in your own individual case, I would say yes, sign an NDA. Now, the one time I'll say not to sign an NDA is if you're just doing a pitch. So let's say you just have a creative idea that you're bringing to a network. A mutual NDA or an NDA doesn't make as much sense because you're trying to sell that. And that usually means you might be selling it to multiple parties. So you want kind of the opposite of a non-disclosure. You want full disclosure all over town that you've got this brand new idea, and you want people to make a bidding war onto it so that someone will find the best buyer. So in that case, do not sign or get a non-disclosure agreement. Okay, so that is today's little legal discussion. I have to say once again, I am not a lawyer. I am just an animation professional who's been around this so long that I've seen probably hundreds of these. I've signed hundreds of non-disclosures. Every time I visited a company, I had to sign a new one. I was giving out submission release forms. I was reading them. They're all a little bit different, but those are the basic flavors. So depending on your situation, I hope that was valuable for you. And I guess I can say here, please, if this is your first time coming to the channel and you do like this kind of content, I am going to be making a lot more than I have been recently, especially because we're all locked indoors and working from home. So please like and subscribe, and tell anyone that you think might gain something out of this to please follow me. And I hope to talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Stay safe. See you later. Okay. Oh, I hate doing that.